Hi everyone. My name is Avital Rubin. I was asked to speak about growing up with terrorism. I don't think it is something I can really put into words, but I can try. I'm not going to speak about the politics of terrorism. I'll leave that for my father. That's his job. When I moved out of Shiloh at age 18 to start my civilian national service, I couldn't leave my experience with terrorism behind. It is a big part of me and of my personality. Near the end of 2001, during the second Intifada, I was just a regular second grader, enjoying the Hanukkah vacation with friends. We were watching a movie. My younger siblings, Michal and Ruby, were bothering me. So when my father walked in, he offered a ride with him to Jerusalem. Michal quickly said no. She said she was afraid to pass the dangerous areas on the way. Ruby was only a 3-year-old and obviously had no choice, so he went. A few hours later, at dinner time, my mother gets a phone call, throws on her coat, and rushes out of the house. My neighbors started coming over, and someone told me that my father and brother were wounded. Meanwhile, my older brothers were watching the news, and I wasn't allowed to come into the room to see my father and brother on TV. I can only recall seeing for a second my baby brother wrapped up with bandages before someone took me out of the room. I'm not going to get into the whole attack story and the miracles that happened that night, but I will tell you that my father was wounded in his left leg and my brother was shot in his head, 1 millimeter from his brainstem. We started visiting in the hospital, first daily, then weekly. The moment I remember most is when I saw my father, who was such a strong figure to me, someone I can lean on when I fall. I saw him so weak and hurt on a bed and he couldn't even walk. There were strange wires and tubes attached to his body and a big loud machine at his side. My sister was scared to come close. I felt I was being so brave, giving my father a hug. Something so normal for a 7-year-old, but in this case, such a challenge. After visiting my father, we continued on to my brother in the intensive care unit. I used to play with him all the time at home, but I remember feeling so confused because I was so excited to bring him pictures that I had painted at school, but he had no idea who I was. He looked at me as if I was a total stranger. Eventually, my father and brother recovered. Life seemed to go back to normal. Several years later, when I was in 7th grade, doing what a 14-year-old girls usually do, I came home from an activity at Bnei Akiva, the youth group. When I walked in the door at 9:30 p.m., the babysitter told me, "Your parents were supposed to be home an hour ago. I have no idea where they are, and they were not answering their phones." Then she left. The pictures going through my head were so frightening. I woke up my sister and we both started hysterically crying. I called a few of my neighbors, telling them that something has happened to my parents. My parents were finally reached. They were okay and got home safely that night. But since then, I started having nightmares every night about death, with people around me getting hurt. I would cry myself to sleep with terrifying thoughts about death. I remember my mother sitting by my bed, trying to understand what is going through my mind, but I wasn't able to express what I was seeing and feeling. I didn't talk about it with anyone. I couldn't. My father had recently started the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, creating therapy programs to help terror victim children to overcome trauma. My parents suggested that I start going for therapy in the center. I started going there for music therapy after my suffering had become really unbearable. I started going there once a week for an hour. Together with my therapist, I would sing and write songs that I could connect to, involving peace and war. The words peace and war now sounded so confusing. In therapy, I would often sing the song, "Where's the Love?" A regular song that today, when my friends listen to it, it brings them memories of 8th grade. To me, it brings flashbacks of a community in mourning and neighbors wounded. Talking about the contradiction, my best friend's father was the head of security in Shiloh. I remember watching a movie with her when suddenly her father got a phone call, grabbed a gun from under the couch, and ran out of the house. Here we are, two little innocent girls watching a children's movie, and we experienced that guns and terror are not only in the movies. Being a terror victim is not only being connected to a physical terror victim, it is being part of a community that has suffered repeatedly from terrorism. On the first day of the Hebrew month of Adar, before Purim, we have a tradition at school that the 8th graders stay up all night and decorate the school. I was together with all my friends. We put on music, and we're preparing to stay awake all night and have a good time. But a few hours later, we were all called to the main area of school. They told us that our teacher's son was in his yeshiva and that he was missing. We all were praying, so worried and so upset. An hour later, we heard the terrible news that 8 students from Merkaz Arav were murdered by a terrorist. My teacher's son was killed. That night was one of the most traumatic nights of my life. Thankfully, my family is healthy. But some of my friends no longer have a parent who can give them a hug after a long day. Trauma affects you and is expressed also years later. It is not a battle that is over. We have to contend with it all the time. My thoughts and fears didn't disappear. They just matured together with me and are a part of who I am today. They made me as strong and as sensitive as I am. Seeing so much death and suffering growing up only showed me how much I want to cherish and choose real life. Thank you all for listening to my heart and hopefully understanding my message. I do appreciate it.